Sirens wailed in distant city shadows, masking shattered glass crunching under bloody boots. Rain poured relentlessly over Chicago's forgotten alleys. A lone figure shivered inside a cardboard makeshift tent, clutching thin blankets against biting wind. Metal shrieked violently nearby. Tires squealed, followed by a sickening crash, echoing through desolate brick walls. Gasoline flooded cracked pavement. Chloe stumbled outward, finding smoke billowing from a crushed Mercedes. Pinned beneath twisted steel lay a man gasping for air, clutching a silver pendant. Saving him meant risking everything, unaware this bleeding stranger carried sins capable of burning her fragile world to ashes. Winter in Chicago did not merely chill the skin, it hunted the vulnerable. For 22-year-old Chloe Bennett, survival meant staying invisible. She had occupied a forgotten corner of an abandoned textile factory in the West Garfield Park district for 3 months, a ghost haunting the rusted machinery and broken skylights. Society had discarded her after she aged out of a broken foster system, leaving her with nothing but a fierce, feral instinct to endure. It was shortly past 2 a.m, when the deafening roar of a high-powered engine shattered the dead silence of the industrial district. Chloe jolted awake, her breath pluming in the freezing air. The sound of a vehicle traveling at reckless speeds was immediately followed by the terrifying, unmistakable noise of an impact. It sounded like a bomb detonating. Metal tore, glass exploded, and a heavy object rolled multiple times, shaking the very concrete beneath Chloe's threadbare mattress. Fear urged her to stay put. In this part of the city, trouble was a contagion, but the scent of burning rubber and leaking gasoline drifted through the broken windows, accompanied by a faint, agonizing groan. Grabbing a heavy, rusted iron pipe she kept for protection, Chloe crept out of the factory into the torrential rain. Down the narrow, garbage-strewn alleyway, a matte black Mercedes S-Class lay completely upside down. It was a massive, armored beast of a vehicle, but the force of the crash had caved in its reinforced roof. A black SUV, completely totaled, was smashed against a brick wall 50 yards away, the clear instigator of the wreck. Chloe approached cautiously, her boots splashing in oily puddles. The driver of the Mercedes was nowhere to be seen, likely crushed upon impact, but near the rear passenger door, a man was trapped. He had managed to kick the door open and crawl halfway out, before the vehicle's shifting weight pinned his lower left leg against the shattered curb. He was dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, now soaked in rain and his own blood. A deep laceration ran down the side of his face, and his eyes were half closed, glazed with shock and agony. "Hey," Chloe whispered harshly, dropping to her knees beside him. The heat radiating from the undercarriage warned her that the spilled fuel was dangerously close to igniting. "Hey, stay awake!" The man blinked, his dark eyes struggling to focus on her dirt-smudged face. "Get back," he rasped, coughing up a spatter of crimson. "They're coming." "Who is coming?" Chloe asked, but he faded into unconsciousness. A spark flared near the engine block. Time evaporated. Chloe jammed the rusted iron pipe under the heavy steel frame of the door, using the concrete curb as a fulcrum. She threw her entire meager weight against the makeshift lever. Her muscles screamed, tendons straining to their absolute limits as the jagged rust tore into her palms. Slowly, agonizingly, the heavy metal groaned and shifted upward just a fraction of an inch, but enough. With a desperate guttural cry, she reached down with one hand, grabbed the collar of his ruined suit jacket, and yanked him free. The moment his leg slid out, she dropped the pipe. The car settled back down with a heavy crunch. "Come on, move," she grunted, dragging the heavy, unconscious man through the mud and debris. She pulled him into the shadows of the loading dock just as a tongue of flame reached the gasoline pool. A muffled explosion rocked the alley. The shockwave threw Chloe over the stranger's body, showering them in sparks and hot ash. As the fiery glow illuminated the alley, the screech of approaching tires echoed from the main road. "They're coming," his warning echoed in her mind. Panic surged, but Chloe refused to leave him. He was a dead man if she did. Hooking her arms under his armpits, she dragged him backward, hauling his dead weight up the ramp and into the cavernous darkness of the abandoned factory, pulling the heavy steel door shut just as headlights swept across the burning wreckage outside. Inside, the only sound was the drumming of rain on the tin roof and the man's ragged breathing. Chloe laid him down on her meager pile of blankets. Striking a damp match, she lit a single, stubby candle. In the flickering light, the reality of the situation set in. The man was violently handsome, with sharp aristocratic features and a jawline covered in dark stubble. He wore a Patek Philippe watch that likely cost more than a house, and tightly gripped in his right hand was a heavy silver ring bearing an intricate crest, a snarling wolf wrapped in thorns. She didn't know it yet, but she had just dragged Leo Costello, the sole heir to the Costello crime syndicate, into her fragile sanctuary. And the people who had run him off the road were not police, they were the executioners of the rival Mercer family. For 2 days, the abandoned factory became a purgatory of fever and whispered secrets. Leo's leg was badly bruised and lacerated, but thankfully not shattered. However, the deep gash on his temple had become infected. He burned with a dangerous fever, thrashing on Chloe's mattress, muttering names and orders in a mix of English and rapid-fire Italian. Dominic. Secure the port. Silas betrayed us. Chloe listened, her unease growing with every word. She was no fool. The tailored clothes, the luxury watch, the armored car, and the talk of ports and betrayals painted a clear, terrifying picture. She had rescued a ghost of the underworld. To keep him alive, she had to take risks. Leaving him hidden in the shadows of the factory, she ventured out into the freezing daytime streets of West Garfield Park. Using $20 she had found in his impeccably tailored pockets, leaving the thick wad of $100 bills untouched, out of sheer self-preservation, she bought hydrogen peroxide, bandages, and strong over-the-counter painkillers from a sketchy bodega where the clerk didn't ask questions. When she returned, she found him awake. Leo was propped up against a concrete pillar, an imposing figure despite his battered state. In his hand, he held her rusted iron pipe, his knuckles white. The moment Chloe stepped through the heavy metal door, his gaze locked onto her, cold, calculating, and predatory. "Where am I?" His voice was a low, gravelly rasp. "Put the pipe down," Chloe said, keeping her voice remarkably steady despite the tremor in her hands. She set the plastic bag of supplies on a wooden crate. "You're in my home, such as it is. You were pinned under a burning car. I pulled you out." Leo's dark eyes scanned her, assessing her dirty, oversized sweater, her torn jeans, and the fierce defiance in her hazel eyes. He lowered the pipe but didn't release it. "Who else knows I'm here?" "No one," she replied, soaking a clean rag with peroxide. "But there have been cars circling the block. Black SUVs, men looking through the alleys." A shadow crossed his face. Silas Mercer's men were doing sweeps. They knew he hadn't burned in the wreck. "My name is Leon," he lied smoothly, testing her. "I don't care if your name is the Pope," Chloe shot back, kneeling beside him. "Your leg is a mess, and your head wound is infected. If I don't clean it, you'll die of sepsis before those men outside ever find you, so hold still." For a moment, Leo bristled at the command. Men died for speaking to him with a fraction of that disrespect. But as she pressed the stinging cloth to his forehead, he saw the deep, fresh blisters on her palms, burns, and cuts sustained from saving his life. The realization struck him with an unfamiliar weight. In his world of blood, money, and power, transactions were absolute. You gave to get. This homeless girl had ripped her hands apart to save a stranger who offered her nothing, and she hadn't touched the $10,000 in cash sitting in his jacket pocket. "You didn't take my money," he murmured, wincing slightly as she bandaged his head. "I'm broke, not a thief," Chloe muttered, wrapping his leg with surprising gentleness. "Besides, money like yours brings bullets. I prefer to stay alive." The fragile peace was shattered by the sound of crunching gravel outside. Chloe froze. The heavy metallic clack of a car door closing echoed through the thin walls, followed by heavy footsteps approaching the loading dock. Leo instantly grabbed the pipe, his combat instincts overriding his injuries. He forced himself up, leaning heavily against the pillar. "Hide," he ordered her, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "If they see you, you're dead," Chloe whispered back, her heart hammering against her ribs. She shoved him backward into a recessed alcove hidden behind stacks of rotting wooden pallets. "Stay quiet." Before Leo could argue, a violent pounding struck the heavy steel door. Chloe took a deep breath, rubbed some dirt from the floor onto her cheeks to look even more pathetic, and cracked the door open just an inch. Standing outside in the rain were 2 men wearing dark trench coats. The one in front had a scarred jaw and dead shark-like eyes. He held a suppressed pistol casually by his side, barely concealing it. "What do you want?" Chloe squeaked, pitching her voice up to sound terrified, which wasn't entirely an act. "We're looking for someone, sweetheart," the scarred man said, pushing against the door. Chloe held her ground, though her boots slipped on the concrete. A guy, tall, dark hair, wearing a suit. "Got into an accident down the street a couple nights ago." "I haven't seen anyone," Chloe said, staring at his boots. "I just sleep here. Please, leave me alone." The man peered past her into the gloom. "Mind if we take a look?" "Standard neighborhood watch." "It's private property," Chloe said, her voice shaking perfectly. "There's a bunch of wild dogs nesting in the back. That's why I stay near the door. One bit my leg yesterday." The man paused, disgusted. He glanced at his partner, who shrugged. Searching a dark, massive, abandoned factory filled with feral dogs and trash for a corpse didn't appeal to them. "If you see a guy in a suit," the scarred man said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a crumpled $100 bill, "call the number on this card. There's 50 grand in it for you." He shoved the money and a blank card with a phone number through the crack in the door. "Okay," Chloe stammered. The men turned and walked back to their SUV. Chloe waited until the taillights disappeared down the road before she locked the heavy deadbolt and slumped against the door, sliding down to the floor, gasping for air. From the shadows, Leo emerged, leaning against the pallets. He stared at her, profound astonishment warring with deep respect. She had stood face to face with Mercer's hitmen and lied without batting an eye, protecting a man she didn't even know. "You're a terrible liar," Leo said softly. "But you're brave. Too brave for a place like this." Chloe tossed the $100 bill onto the floor. "You owe me a new hideout. They know someone is in here now. I have to move." By the fourth night, the fever broke. Leo's immense physical resilience allowed him to walk with only a slight limp. The dynamic in the factory had shifted. The freezing, desolate space felt charged with an unspoken tension. They sat across from each other around a small, smokeless fire Chloe had built in a rusted oil drum. Leo watched her eat a stale piece of bread. He observed the hollows of her cheeks, the dirt under her fingernails, and the guarded, intelligent spark in her eyes. In his world, women were either dangerous operators or sheltered ornaments. Chloe was something entirely different, a survivor molded by concrete and neglect, possessing a moral compass that defied her circumstances. "Why are you out here, Chloe?" he asked quietly, the flames reflecting in his dark eyes. She paused, looking at him warily. "The system failed. The foster homes were worse than the streets. Out here, the monsters don't pretend to be your parents. You know exactly what they are." Leo absorbed this. The monsters don't pretend. In the Costello family, the monsters sat at the dinner table and kissed your cheeks before slipping a knife in your back. "I understand that more than you know," he said. "I doubt that, Leon," she scoffed softly. "Your suit costs more than everything I've consumed in my entire life." "Money just changes the clothes the monsters wear," he replied. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, shattered satellite phone. He had managed to fix the battery connection earlier that day, using a paperclip and sheer willpower. "I sent a signal. My people are coming." Chloe's chest tightened. She had known this moment would come, but a sudden, inexplicable sense of loss washed over her. "The men who came looking for you?" "No," Leo's voice turned ice cold. "The men who are going to bury the men who came looking for me." An hour later, the low hum of engines vibrated through the alley. This time, it wasn't one car. It was a fleet, 4 heavily armored SUVs parked in a defensive perimeter around the factory. Men wielding tactical rifles stepped out into the rain, securing the street with ruthless military precision. Chloe backed into the shadows, terrified. She watched as the heavy steel door was pushed open. A massive man with silver at his temples and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow stepped inside. This was Dominic Rossi, the Costello family's most feared enforcer. "Boss," Dominic said, his gruff voice echoing. He rushed forward, dropping his weapon to support Leo. "We thought you were dead. Silas Mercer put out word that you burned in the S-Class." "Silas is a dead man breathing," Leo stated, his entire demeanor shifting. The wounded, quiet man in the factory was gone. In his place stood the heir to the Costello Empire, radiating terrifying authority. "Get the cars ready. We have a war to finish tonight." "Boss?" Chloe whispered from the dark, the word slipping out before she could stop it. Dominic's hand snapped to his holster, a gun pointed into the darkness in a fraction of a second. Who is that? Stand down, Dominic, Leo roared, his voice echoing like thunder. Dominic immediately lowered his weapon, stepping back in submission. Leo turned, limping toward the shadows where Chloe stood trembling. He reached out, gently taking her scarred, blistered hands in his. The contrast between his lethal environment and his tender touch was jarring. "My real name is Leo," he said softly, looking down into her wide, fearful eyes. "Leo Costello." Chloe's breath hitched. Even on the streets, everyone knew the name Costello. They owned the judges, the docks, the police, and the underground. She had just harbored the crown prince of the Chicago Mafia. "I saved a mobster," she whispered, a mix of horror and disbelief in her voice. "You saved a man," Leo corrected her gently. He reached into his coat and pulled out the heavy silver ring with the wolf crest. He pressed it firmly into her palm, folding her bruised fingers over it. "Keep this. Wherever you go, whoever you show this to, if they run the streets, they will know you are under the protection of the Costello family. No one will ever lay a hand on you." "I don't want your protection," Chloe said stubbornly, though she didn't drop the ring. "I just want to be left alone." "You don't have a choice anymore, Chloe," Leo said, a profound sadness in his eyes. "You saved me. In my world, a life debt is sacred. I will come back for you. That is not a promise. It is a guarantee." He turned and walked toward the door, flanked by Dominic and the armed guards. Before he stepped out into the rain, he paused, looking back at the small, fragile girl standing in the dirt of the factory. "Leave this place," Leo commanded Dominic, handing his enforcer a look that brooked no argument. "Leave a team behind to watch her from a distance. If a single hair on her head is harmed, I will hold you personally responsible." The heavy door slammed shut, plunging the factory back into silence. Chloe stood alone, the silver ring heavy in her hand. She thought the nightmare was over because the bleeding stranger had left. She didn't realize that by saving the mafia boss's son, her real story, one written in blood, loyalty, and unavoidable danger, had just begun. Dawn broke over Chicago, painting the smog-choked sky in bruised shades of purple and gray. Chloe did not wait for the sun to fully rise. The moment the heavy steel doors had slammed shut behind Leo Costello, the crushing reality of her situation settled in. The factory was no longer a sanctuary, it was a beacon. She packed her meager existence into a faded canvas duffel bag, 2 oversized flannel shirts, a pair of worn wool socks, a rusted flashlight, and a half-empty box of generic granola bars. The silver ring, heavy, cold, and terrifyingly significant, was threaded onto a piece of scavenged electrical wire and tied securely around her neck, hidden beneath her layers of clothing. It felt less like a shield and more like an anchor, threatening to drag her to the bottom of a very dark ocean. Slipping out through a rusted grate in the rear loading bay, Chloe abandoned West Garfield Park. She kept her head down, pulling the hood of her olive-drab jacket over her face. She needed to disappear into the veins of the city. The CTA Blue Line at Racine Station offered the perfect anonymity. Commuters were too tired, too focused on their own miserable mornings, to notice a girl who looked like she belonged to the pavement. But Chloe underestimated the reach of a bleeding empire. Silas Mercer's men had not retreated after the skirmish at the factory. They had regrouped. They knew Leo Costello had survived, and they knew he hadn't done it alone. Someone had pulled him from that burning Mercedes S-Class. Silas, a man whose paranoia was matched only by his cruelty, demanded loose ends be severed. By noon, Chloe was walking down a crowded stretch of State Street, passing the glowing display windows of Macy's and Sephora. The contrast between her dirt-stained boots and the pristine luxury around her usually made her invisible. Today, however, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. A primal instinct, honed by years of surviving foster care and homeless shelters, screamed at her. She glanced at the reflection in a darkened storefront window. Half a block behind her, 2 men in tailored navy peacoats were matching her pace. They lacked the casual, meandering walk of tourists. Their eyes were locked onto her olive jacket. Panic, icy and sharp, pierced her chest. Chloe picked up her pace, weaving through a group of business professionals carrying briefcases. She took a sharp right turn onto East Washington Street, aiming for the dense, chaotic labyrinth of the Loop's alleys. If she could reach the lower levels of Wacker Drive, she could lose them in the subterranean darkness. She ducked into a narrow service alley between two towering limestone skyscrapers. The stench of rotting garbage and stale beer filled the air. She broke into a sprint, her boots slapping against the damp asphalt. "Hey, stop right there!" a voice barked, echoing off the brick walls. Chloe didn't look back. She pushed her burning legs harder, rounding a corner past a row of industrial dumpsters. But as she cleared the corner, a massive figure stepped out from the shadows, blocking her path entirely. It was the scarred man from the factory door. His dead, shark-like eyes crinkled in a horrifying semblance of a smile. "Told you we were doing a neighborhood watch, sweetheart," he rasped, drawing a matte black Springfield Armory 1911 pistol from his coat. "Looks like you decided to move neighborhoods." Chloe froze, her breath tearing through her throat. She backed up slowly, but the two men in peacoats stepped around the corner behind her, cutting off her escape. She was trapped in a 30-foot stretch of concrete. "I don't know anything," Chloe said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "I swear, I just left the factory because I was scared." "You should be," the scarred man chuckled, stepping closer. "Because the boss wants to know exactly what Leo Costello told you before his goons picked him up, and you're gonna tell us every single word." He reached out, his rough leather-gloved hand grabbing the collar of her jacket. He yanked her forward violently. The movement caused the silver ring hidden under her shirt to swing out, catching the dim alley light. The scarred man's eyes widened, recognizing the snarling wolf crest instantly. "Well, well, he gave you a token. That means you're more than just a good Samaritan." Before his fingers could wrap around the silver pendant, the deafening roar of a V8 engine shattered the alley's tension. A massive, heavily armored Cadillac Escalade tore down the narrow path, its reinforced steel bumper scraping the brick walls, sending sparks showering into the air. The driver slammed on the brakes. The heavy doors flew open before the vehicle even came to a complete halt. Dominic Rossi stepped out, a suppressed Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine gun raised and leveled with terrifying speed. "Drop it, Gideon," Dominic roared, his voice a force of nature. Two more Costello enforcers poured out from the back of the Escalade, weapons drawn and trained on the Mercer men. The scarred man, Gideon, hesitated for a fraction of a second, his pistol still pointed near Chloe. Two suppressed shots echoed like quiet coughs. Gideon's shoulder exploded in a mist of crimson, and his knee buckled as a second bullet shattered his kneecap. He collapsed to the pavement, screaming in agony. The two men in peacoats immediately dropped their weapons, raising their hands in surrender. Dominic didn't even look at the bleeding man. He strode forward, grabbed Chloe by the arm not gently, but securely, and hauled her toward the Escalade. "Get in," he ordered. "No! Let me go!" Chloe fought back, thrashing against his grip, terrified that she was just trading one monster for another. "If I let you go, you're dead in an hour," Dominic growled, shoving her into the plush leather backseat of the SUV. "The boss gave an order. You're under Costello protection now. Whether you like it or not." The door slammed shut, sealing her in silence as the Escalade reversed out of the alley, leaving the bleeding Mercer men behind in the rain. The Cadillac Escalade bypassed the grid of the city, gliding smoothly toward the Gold Coast. They pulled into a private underground parking garage, heavily guarded by men in dark suits. Chloe was ushered into a private, keycard-operated elevator that shot upward, making her stomach drop. When the doors chimed and parted, Chloe stepped into a world that felt aggressively alien. It was a sprawling, two-story penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the slate-gray water and the sweeping Chicago skyline. The floors were polished Brazilian walnut, and a massive, custom-built Chesterfield leather sofa dominated the center of the room. Against the far wall, a state-of-the-art kitchen gleamed with a massive Sub-Zero refrigerator and Wolf appliances. It was a fortress wrapped in millions of dollars of silk and steel. Standing by the window, gazing out at the churning lake, was Leo. He had discarded the ruined suit. He wore a crisp, dark blue Tom Ford dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing intricate dark tattoos that snaked around his wrists. A fresh professional bandage covered his temple, and he leaned slightly on a silver-handled cane. The moment the elevator doors opened, he turned, his dark eyes locking onto Chloe. "Dominic," Leo said softly, his gaze never leaving her. "Wait outside." Dominic nodded respectfully and stepped back into the elevator, leaving them alone in the vast, silent penthouse. Chloe stood frozen near the entryway, her dirty canvas duffel bag clutched tightly against her chest like a shield. The contrast was humiliating. She was tracking mud onto rugs that cost more than she would earn in a lifetime. She smelled of damp alleys and fear, while the air in the room was subtly scented with cedar, expensive leather, and Baccarat Rouge cologne. "I told you to leave me alone," Chloe said, her voice echoing in the large space. It sounded smaller, weaker than she intended. "And I told you that in my world a life debt is a guarantee," Leo replied. He slowly walked toward her, the cane clicking softly against the hardwood. "Gideon and his crew were tracking you. If Dominic hadn't been monitoring the perimeter of your old hideout, you would be in the trunk of a Mercer car right now. Because of you." Chloe fired back, anger finally overriding her fear. She dropped her bag. "I was fine. I was invisible. I pulled you out of a fire, and my reward is being hunted by men with guns." "You were surviving, Chloe." "You weren't living," Leo said, his tone infuriatingly calm. He stopped a few feet away from her. "You are not invisible anymore. Silas Mercer knows someone saved me. He wants to know what I told you. He wants leverage. To him, you are a loose thread." "So, what am I to you?" she demanded, glaring up at him. "A pet? A prisoner?" Leo's jaw tightened. The question struck a nerve. He looked at her fierce, dirt-smudged face, remembering the heat of the burning Mercedes and the agonizing strain on her fragile arms as she pulled him free. He remembered her refusing his money. "You are my responsibility," he said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a weight that demanded absolute attention. "In this city, the Costello name is a shield, but it is also a target. I put a target on your back the moment I gave you that ring. Now it is my duty to ensure you do not bleed for my sins." He reached out, his fingers lightly brushing the collar of her jacket where the silver wire peeked through. A shiver ran down Chloe's spine, totally involuntary and terrifyingly electric. "There are 3 guest bedrooms down that hall," Leo continued, stepping back to give her space. "The bathrooms are stocked. There are clothes in the closets. My assistant procured various sizes. Eat. Sleep. Do not go near the windows and do not try to leave." "And how long does this last?" Chloe asked, crossing her arms defensively. "Until you kill this Silas guy?" Leo's eyes darkened, a cold, lethal shadow passing over his aristocratic features. "Until the streets run red with his blood, and the Mercer family is nothing but a footnote in this city's history. Yes." For the next week, Chloe existed in a state of suspended animation within the gilded cage of the penthouse. The luxury was overwhelming and deeply uncomfortable. The shower rained scalding, endless water, washing away months of grime. The bed was a cloud of Egyptian cotton. The kitchen was stocked with fresh produce, prime cuts of meat, and artisan breads. Yet every bite she took tasted like ash. She rarely saw Leo during the day. He operated out of an office on the 2nd floor, surrounded by thick glass and heavy mahogany doors. Men in suits constantly came and went. She heard raised voices, the slamming of fists on desks, and snippets of chilling conversations about the docks, shipments, and making an example. But at night, the penthouse grew quiet. And it was in these quiet hours that the dynamic between them began to shift. One evening, unable to sleep, Chloe wandered into the massive, dimly lit living room. She found Leo sitting in a leather armchair in the dark, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, staring blankly at the city lights. He looked exhausted, the weight of his empire visibly pressing down on his shoulders. He didn't turn around, but he knew she was there. "The silence is the hardest part to get used to, isn't it?" he murmured. Chloe walked over, wrapping a thick cashmere throw blanket around her shoulders, and sat on the far edge of the sofa. The streets are never quiet. Even at 3 a.m., there's always a siren, a shout, an engine. Up here, it feels like a vacuum. "It's an isolation tank," Leo agreed, taking a slow sip of his bourbon. "My father built this empire from nothing. He taught me that power requires elevation. You have to be above the people you command, or they will pull you down." "Sounds lonely," Chloe observed quietly. Leo finally turned to look at her, the harsh lines of his face softened in the ambient light of the city. "It is. Until someone comes along who isn't afraid of the heights." The air between them thickened, charged with a sudden, undeniable gravity. Chloe felt her pulse quicken. She knew who he was. She knew the violence he commanded. But sitting here in the dark, she didn't see a Mafia boss. She saw the wounded man she had dragged from a burning car. "Why didn't you let me die, Chloe?" he asked suddenly, his voice raspy. "You had every reason to walk away. You owed me nothing. The world has given you nothing but pain. Why risk your life for a stranger?" Chloe looked down at her hands, the blistered skin slowly healing into pale scars. "Because if I walked away, if I let a man burn to death while I stood by and watched, then the monsters win. Then I become just like the people who abandoned me. I won't let the streets turn me into that." Leo stared at her, profoundly moved. In a world defined by greed, betrayal, and calculated violence, Chloe's pure, stubborn morality was something entirely foreign. It was beautiful. It was dangerous. "You are a terrifying woman, Chloe Bennett," Leo whispered, leaning forward. Before the moment could stretch further, a sharp, piercing alarm shattered the quiet of the penthouse. Red strobe lights began flashing near the elevator banks. Leo was out of his chair in a millisecond, the bourbon glass shattering on the floor. He drew a sleek, silver Sig Sauer P226 from a holster beneath his jacket, his entire demeanor shifting from vulnerability to absolute, lethal readiness. "Get behind the kitchen island. Now!" he barked, moving toward the reinforced doors. "What's happening?" Chloe cried, scrambling off the sofa. "The perimeter has been breached," Leo said, his eyes scanning the security monitors on the wall. His blood ran cold. The monitors didn't show Silas Mercer's men breaking in from the outside. They showed Dominic's own security detail lying motionless on the ground floor and the private elevator ascending rapidly. "It's an inside job," Leo gritted his teeth, racking the slide of his pistol. Someone within his inner circle had sold them out, someone who knew exactly where he was hiding the girl. The elevator chimed, a cheerful metallic sound that signaled the arrival of death. The polished steel doors of the private elevator slid apart with a soft, melodic chime that felt horrifyingly out of place. Chloe pressed herself against the cold marble of the kitchen island, her hands clamped over her mouth to muffle her erratic breathing. From her vantage point, she could see the reflection of the intruders in the floor-to-ceiling windows. There were 4 of them, dressed in tactical black gear, holding suppressed submachine guns. Leading the execution squad was not Silas Mercer. It was a man Chloe had seen walking into Leo's glass-walled office just 2 days ago, a man Leo had greeted with an embrace. Dante. Leo's voice cut through the cavernous penthouse. He stood perfectly still behind the heavy Chesterfield sofa, his Sig Sauer P226 leveled directly at the man's chest. The betrayal in his tone was an open wound. "Tell me Silas paid you enough to cover your funeral expenses." Dante Russo, a high-ranking Kappa regime who had practically helped raise Leo, stepped out of the elevator. His face was a mask of cold, pragmatic ambition. "Nothing personal, Leo. Your father is getting old. He refused the Mercer alliance. Silas offered me 30% of the Southside shipping routes and complete control of the unions. You and the old man were just in the way." "Where is Dominic?" Leo asked, his grip tightening on the pistol. "Bleeding out in the parking garage," Dante replied smoothly. "He fought like a dog, but numbers are numbers. It's over, Leo. Put the gun down, hand over the stray girl, and I'll make sure it's quick. A bullet to the back of the head. No suffering." "The girl is under my protection," Leo growled, his eyes dark with lethal intent. "Your protection?" Dante laughed, a harsh scraping sound. "You're a dead man standing in a glass box. Take him." Chaos erupted. Leo fired first. 2 deafening cracks echoed through the room. The man to Dante's left dropped instantly, a hollow-point bullet shattering his tactical visor. Dante and the remaining 2 men opened fire, unleashing a hail of suppressed gunfire that tore the penthouse apart. Chloe screamed as the custom Wolf oven behind her exploded into a shower of sparks and shrapnel. The expensive Baccarat crystal decanters on the bar shattered into a million glittering diamonds. The plush leather of the sofa ripped open, filling the air with white stuffing like macabre snow. "Chloe, move!" Leo roared over the deafening gunfire. He laid down covering fire, forcing Dante and his men to duck behind the shattered remains of the elevator bank. The sheer volume of incoming bullets began chewing through the heavy kitchen island where Chloe was hiding. Marble dust choked the air. Operating on pure street survival instinct, Chloe didn't freeze. She grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the lower cabinet and hurled it blindly over the counter. It smashed into the expensive chandelier hanging above the living room. The fixture crashed down, taking the main power line with it. The penthouse plunged into absolute darkness, save for the ambient, ghostly glow of the Chicago skyline pouring through the bullet-riddled windows. The sudden blackout gave Leo the fraction of a second he needed. He sprinted across the ruined hardwood floor, grabbing Chloe's arm with a vice-like grip. He hauled her up and dragged her toward the master bedroom corridor. Bullets chewed the drywall inches from their heads, showering them in plaster. Leo kicked open the heavy oak door of the master suite, locking it behind them. He didn't stop there. He dragged a frantic Chloe toward the massive walk-in closet, ignoring the rack of bespoke Tom Ford suits. He pressed his bloody palm against a biometric scanner, hidden behind a full-length mirror. A mechanical heavy clunk sounded, and the mirror swung open, revealing a narrow, concrete maintenance shaft with a steel spiral staircase plunging into the abyss. "Go!" Leo shoved her inside, just as Dante's men began kicking at the bedroom door. Chloe scrambled down the cold steel steps in the pitch black. Leo followed, pulling the heavy blast door shut just as the bedroom door gave way. The thick steel muffled the muffled thuds of automatic gunfire from the other side. They descended in total darkness. The air grew stale and freezing, smelling of rust and damp concrete. Chloe's lungs burned, and her legs shook violently. Below her, she could hear Leo's heavy, labored breathing. The desperate sprint had torn open his healing leg wound, and the adrenaline was rapidly wearing off. "Keep moving," Leo gasped, his voice echoing in the tight shaft. They have the building locked down. We have to hit the sublevels." They spiraled down for what felt like hours, descending past the luxury floors, past the lobby, deep into the foundation of the Gold Coast high-rise. When they finally hit the bottom, Leo pushed open a rusted grate. They spilled out into a subterranean service tunnel just as a wave of nausea hit Leo. He collapsed against the damp, graffiti-covered wall, clutching his bleeding thigh. The pristine Tom Ford shirt was soaked in sweat and fresh blood. Chloe knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed her jacket against his leg. The illusion of the untouchable Mafia prince was shattered. Down here, in the dirt and the dark, he was just a bleeding man who had lost his kingdom. "We need to call someone," Chloe whispered, panic rising in her throat. "Your father, another enforcer." "No," Leo grunted, swatting her hand away as he reached into his pocket. He pulled out his encrypted satellite phone and crushed it under the heel of his boot. "Dante ran my security. He knows all the safe houses. He controls the comms. If I make a call, they triangulate our position in 3 minutes." "Then what do we do?" Chloe asked, staring into the dark tunnel. Leo looked up at her, his aristocratic features pale and drawn. He was completely stripped of his power, his money, and his men. "I don't know," he confessed, the admission costing him every ounce of his pride. Chloe looked at the bleeding billionaire, then at the dark, rat-infested tunnel stretching out before them. The terror slowly drained from her, replaced by a cold, familiar resolve. She was no longer in his gilded cage. They were in the gutters of Chicago. "Get up," Chloe said, her voice dropping the tremble. She slipped her arm under his shoulder and hauled him to his feet. "Where are we going?" Leo asked, wincing as he put weight on his leg. "You brought me into your world, Leo," Chloe said, her hazel eyes hardening. "Now I'm bringing you into mine. Welcome to the underground." The belly of Chicago is a labyrinth of forgotten history. Beneath the bustling streets of the Loop lies a network of abandoned freight tunnels, originally built in the early 1900s to deliver coal and remove ash. To the city above, they were sealed and dead. To the people who had fallen through the cracks of society, they were a highway. Chloe navigated the pitch-black tunnels with the precision of a bat, using only the dim beam of her rusted flashlight. She practically carried Leo. Every step was an agony for him. His breathing ragged, his blood leaving a faint, damning trail on the cracked concrete. "How do you know this place?" Leo rasped, his arm heavy across her shoulders. "When the winter drops below zero, the shelters fill up," Chloe replied quietly, her eyes scanning the darkness for tripwires or broken glass. "If you stay on the streets, you freeze to death. Down here, the geothermal heat gets trapped. It smells like sulfur and rat droppings, but it's 45 degrees. It keeps you alive." After a grueling hour of walking beneath the city, the narrow tunnel opened up into a wider junction. Makeshift tents made of blue tarps and stolen construction netting dotted the cavernous space. Small, smokeless fires burned in metal buckets. The moment Chloe's flashlight swept over the camp, the shadows moved. 6 figures stepped out, blocking their path. They held rusted pipes, jagged pieces of rebar, and scavenged knives. In the underground, strangers meant danger, and a man bleeding out in an expensive suit meant an absolute disaster. "Keep walking, Chloe," a gruff voice echoed from the dark. A tall, gaunt man with a heavily scarred face and a wild beard stepped forward. He went by the name Silas, ironically sharing a name with the man hunting them, though this Silas wouldn't survive a day in a custom suit. "You know the rules. No heat down here." "I need Old Man Hayes, Silas." Chloe stood her ground, supporting Leo's sagging weight. "He owes me. I kept the cops away from his stash last month." "He's bleeding out." Silas pointed a jagged knife at Leo. "And he smells like money. Cops are one thing. The people looking for guys like him? They'll flood these tunnels with gasoline and burn us all out." Leo, barely conscious, felt his instincts flare. He reached for his empty shoulder holster, a pathetic phantom movement that Silas immediately noticed. "Please," Chloe pleaded, stepping slightly in front of Leo, shielding him. She reached under the collar of her olive jacket and pulled out the heavy silver ring with the wolf crest. The metal caught the dim light of the bucket fires. "I don't have money," Chloe said, her voice carrying a desperate authority. "But this ring is solid silver. It's worth a few thousand easily. It's yours. Just get me to Hayes." Leo's eyes widened through the haze of pain. "Chloe, no," he murmured. "That's your protection." "It's useless if you're dead," she shot back. Silas stared at the heavy ring. Greed won over caution. He snatched the pendant from her hand, biting the metal to test it. Satisfied, he jerked his head toward a dark corridor to the left. "Hayes is in the old pump room. But if he dies, you haul his body out of here yourself." 10 minutes later, they were in a cramped, damp, circular room. Old Man Hayes, an unlicensed, disgraced former EMT who lost his medical license to a heroin addiction a decade ago, was working over Leo on a rusted metal table. Chloe sat in the corner, her knees pulled to her chest, watching in grim silence. Hayes dug the bullet fragments out of Leo's torn leg using forceps sterilized with cheap vodka, sewing the wound shut with fishing line. Leo refused a rag to bite down on, taking the excruciating pain in stoic, sweating silence. His dark eyes never left Chloe. When Hayes finished, he took the last of the vodka as payment and limped out of the room, leaving them alone in the dim glow of a battery-powered lantern. The silence between them was heavy, fundamentally altered by the events of the night. The power dynamic had violently flipped. The billionaire heir was entirely at the mercy of the homeless girl who had just traded her only shield to save him again. "You shouldn't have given him the ring," Leo finally spoke, his voice a gravelly whisper. "You're an idiot if you think a piece of jewelry is going to stop a bullet," Chloe replied softly, resting her chin on her knees. "Dante didn't care about it. Why would a guy in a sewer care?" "That ring was proof that you were mine to protect," Leo said, struggling to sit up against the cold brick wall. He looked at her, truly looking past the dirt and the oversized clothes. He saw the fierce, unyielding loyalty that his own blood family severely lacked. "I don't need protecting, Leo," Chloe said, meeting his gaze. "I've survived this long on my own." "No," Leo corrected her gently, the aristocratic arrogance entirely gone from his voice. "You survived. But you shouldn't have to. Dante and Mercer took my home, my men, and my father's legacy tonight. But sitting here, bleeding in the dirt, the only thing I care about is that they almost took you." Chloe's breath hitched. In the cold, foul-smelling darkness of the Chicago underbelly, the words carried a weight more profound than any expensive gift he could have offered her in the penthouse. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Leo leaned his head back against the brick, his jaw setting into a line of absolute, terrifying resolve. The wounded man was disappearing, replaced by something much darker and far more dangerous. He was no longer the heir apparent. He was the wolf, backed into a corner. "Now," Leo whispered, his eyes flashing with lethal intent in the lantern light, "we wait for the sun to come up. Then I show Dante and Silas Mercer what happens when you force a Costello to fight from the gutters." The sun rose over Chicago, though in the subterranean depths of the old freight tunnels, morning was only marked by the faint, distant rumble of the CTA Red Line vibrating through the concrete. Leo's fever had abated, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. Old Man Hayes's brutal surgery had worked, the bleeding had stopped, and while Leo couldn't run, He could stand. He leaned heavily against the damp brick wall, tracing a map in the dirt floor with a rusted piece of rebar. Chloe sat across from him, sipping lukewarm coffee out of a scavenged paper cup, her hazel eyes fixed on the makeshift diagram. Dante controls the penthouse, the main accounts, and the enforcers who flipped, Leo explained, his voice a low, gravelly hum. But my father was paranoid. He never trusted the digital age. He kept a shadow ledger and a secondary armory that isn't on any Costello property deed. Only one man has the keys. Let me guess, Chloe said, setting her cup down. Another mobster in a custom suit? An attorney, Leo corrected, a ghost of a smirk touching his pale lips. Arthur Kensington. He's been the family's consigliere for 30 years. He operates out of a private office at the Union League Club on Jackson Boulevard. Dante won't touch him yet. Arthur holds the legal deeds to the legitimate businesses. Without him, Dante can't launder Mercer's money. So, you call him, Chloe said. I can't, Leo replied. Arthur assumes any call right now is a wiretap or a trap. He won't meet with anyone he recognizes. Dante has eyes on the club's perimeter. If one of my loyal men gets within 50 feet, they'll be shot. Leo looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The unspoken request hung heavy in the damp, freezing air. No, Chloe breathed, shaking her head. No, Leo, I'm a ghost, but I don't know the first thing about high society lawyers or infiltrating private clubs. You don't need to infiltrate, Leo said softly, limping toward her. He crouched down, wincing as his knee popped. You just need to be exactly what you are, invisible. To men like Dante's guards, a girl in an oversized coat carrying a mop bucket is part of the scenery. They don't look at the working class. They look right through them. Chloe swallowed hard. She knew he was right. Society's absolute disregard for the homeless and the poor was her greatest armor. What do I say to him? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Tell him, the wolves starve in winter but they never freeze, Leo instructed, gripping her shoulder. His touch was warm, grounding her in the terrifying reality of the moment. He will know it's from me. He'll give you a locker number and a key. That locker contains the funds, the comms, and the location of the armory. With those, I can rally the men who stayed loyal. An hour later, Chloe emerged from a grated storm drain 2 blocks from the Union League Club. The biting wind of the Chicago winter whipped at her face. She had traded her olive jacket for a faded blue canvas uniform shirt she bought off a tunnel dweller for 3 granola bars. She carried a heavy plastic garbage bag filled with empty aluminum cans, the perfect camouflage. The Union League Club was a fortress of classic architecture, radiating old money and exclusive power. Just as Leo predicted, 2 unmarked black SUVs sat idling across the street. Men in tailored coats stood near the alleyways, their eyes scanning the affluent members walking through the brass-handled revolving doors. Chloe kept her head down. She dragged her bag of cans along the sidewalk, her boots scuffing the concrete. One of the guards, a man with a thick neck and a coiled earpiece, glanced at her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she deliberately dropped an empty soda can, muttering to herself as she bent to chase it. The guard curled his lip in disgust and looked away, his eyes scanning past her to a passing Mercedes. She was a ghost. Slipping past the main entrance, Chloe headed for the service alley. The heavy delivery doors were propped open as a food vendor unloaded crates of fresh produce. She slipped inside, navigating the maze of industrial kitchens and laundry corridors until she found the service elevator. Floor 4, private offices. When the doors chimed open, the transition was jarring. From the chaotic, grease-stained kitchens, she stepped onto plush, crimson carpeting. The walls were lined with oil paintings of dead rich men. Chloe ducked into a nearby janitor's closet, waiting as 2 men in bespoke suits walked past, discussing stock portfolios. Once the hallway cleared, she crept toward the heavy oak door bearing the brass nameplate, Arthur Kensington, Esquire. She didn't knock. She slipped inside, closing the door silently behind her. The office was a library of leather-bound books and rich mahogany. Sitting behind a massive desk was an older man with silver hair perfectly parted, wearing a tweed waistcoat. He was stamping a stack of legal documents. He didn't look up. The cleaning staff isn't scheduled until 8, Maria, Arthur said, his voice cultured and sharp. The wolves starve in winter, Chloe said, her voice shaking but clear. Arthur froze. The heavy brass stamp slipped from his hand, clattering loudly against the wood. He slowly looked up. his piercing blue eyes locking onto the dirty, terrified girl standing in his office. "But they never freeze," Arthur finished, standing up instantly. He moved to the door, locking the deadbolt before turning back to her. "Where is he? Is he alive?" "He's bleeding in a tunnel under the city," Chloe said quickly. "He sent me. He said you have a key." Arthur stared at her, assessing the dirt on her face, the oversized clothes, and the fierce protective fire in her eyes. He trusted a stray with the keys to the kingdom. My God, the boy really is his father's son. Without another word, Arthur moved to a framed map of historic Chicago on the wall. He swung it open, revealing a hidden wall safe. He spun the dial rapidly, pulled the heavy steel door open, and extracted a small, unmarked brass key and a slip of paper. "This is for a private storage unit in Pilsen, Unit 404. It's registered under a shell corporation," Arthur said, pressing the items into her scarred hands. Inside is a secured satellite phone with a direct line to the loyal capos, an armored Audi RS6, and enough firepower to start a small war. "Thank you," Chloe whispered, turning to leave. "Wait," Arthur said softly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wad of $100 bills. "Take a cab. And girl, when this is over, do not let him pull you into the dark. You are meant for the light." The storage unit in Pilsen was less of a garage and more of a subterranean bunker. When Chloe unlocked the heavy rolling door and guided Leo inside later that evening, the overhead fluorescent lights flickered on, revealing their salvation. Sitting in the center of the concrete room was a matte black Audi RS6 Avant, heavily armored and modified for pursuit. Along the back wall were metal gun lockers, loaded with tactical vests, suppressed assault rifles, and crates of ammunition. Leo leaned against the hood of the Audi, his breathing labored, but his eyes alight with a terrifying, predatory fire. He picked up the secure satellite phone Arthur had provided and dialed a single number. "It's Costello," Leo said when the line clicked open. "Rally the men. Dante and Mercer think they own the city. Tonight, we remind them who built it." Within 2 hours, the silent industrial streets of the South Side docks became the staging ground for a massacre. Silas Mercer and Dante Russo had convened at a massive, corrugated steel warehouse at the Calumet River Terminal to finalize their alliance and inspect a stolen shipment of imported weapons. They thought they had won. They were wrong. Chloe sat in the driver's seat of the idling Audi RS6, parked in a concealed alley 3 blocks from the warehouse. Her hands gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. Leo had forbidden her from coming closer, ordering her to keep the engine running and the doors locked. "If I don't come back in 45 minutes, Leo had told her, loading a fresh magazine into his Sig Sauer, "you drive. You take this car, you take the cash in the trunk, and you disappear. You never look back." "You better come back, Leo Costello," she had replied, her voice fierce. "Or I'll drag you out of hell myself." At exactly midnight, the assault began. It wasn't a reckless shootout. It was a surgical, tactical dismantling of the Mercer forces. Leo's loyalists, men who had sworn blood oaths to his father, struck from the shadows. Suppressed sniper fire from the surrounding cranes neutralized Dante's rooftop lookouts in seconds. Then, Leo kicked open the side door of the warehouse. He moved with a lethal, terrifying grace, ignoring the searing pain in his thigh. He was a force of nature, a wolf reclaiming his territory. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Gunfire echoed like thunder over the freezing river. Men screamed, crates splintered under a hail of bullets, and the smell of cordite filled the damp air. Dante Russo, realizing his perimeter had collapsed, tried to flee toward a waiting speedboat at the rear loading dock. But as he burst through the exit doors, a massive, imposing figure blocked his path. Dominic Rossi. The enforcer was battered, his left arm in a makeshift sling from the parking garage ambush, but his right hand held a heavy revolver leveled at Dante's chest. "Going somewhere, traitor?" Dominic growled. Before Dante could raise his weapon, Leo stepped out of the shadows behind Dominic. His face was spattered with blood, his tailored shirt ruined, but he radiated absolute authority. "Silas is dead," Leo stated, his voice carrying over the sound of the churning river. "His men are surrendering or bleeding out. It's over, Dante." Dante dropped his gun, raising his hands in a frantic plea. "Leo, wait. We can make a deal. I control the unions." "You control nothing," Leo said coldly. He raised his pistol and fired a single echoing shot. Dante collapsed lifeless onto the freezing concrete. The Costello empire was secure. 40 minutes after he had left, the heavy passenger door of the Audi RS6 swung open. Chloe jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. Leo slid into the seat, smelling of smoke, blood, and freezing rain. He dropped his empty pistol onto the floorboard and leaned his head back against the headrest, closing his eyes. "Drive," he whispered, exhaustion finally taking him. Chloe threw the car into gear, the powerful engine roaring to life as they sped away from the docks, leaving the burning wreckage of Silas Mercer's ambition behind them. The Costello empire was rebuilt on the ashes of betrayal, but the man ruling it had fundamentally changed. A week later, Leo stood in a newly secured, heavily guarded estate in Lake Forest. He walked into the grand library, where Chloe sat by a roaring fireplace, reading. She was no longer wearing oversized flannels. She wore a soft, cream-colored cashmere sweater, though her combat boots remained firmly on her feet. Leo approached her, reaching into his pocket. He held out his hand, opening his palm. Resting on his skin was the heavy silver ring with the snarling wolf crest. "I tracked down Silas in the tunnels," Leo said softly. "It cost me $10,000 to buy this back from him. A terrible return on investment." Chloe smiled, taking the cold silver and slipping it onto her thumb. "I told you it was just a piece of metal." "It's not," Leo murmured, kneeling beside her chair, his dark eyes looking up at the girl who had pulled him from the fire. "It's a promise. You saved a stranger, Chloe, but you kept a king from losing his soul." In the heart of Chicago's brutal underworld, the homeless girl and the Mafia boss's son had found the one thing neither money nor power could buy: an unbreakable, fiercely loyal love.